Hey everybody, it's author MD New and welcome back to my writing tips and tricks for authors. Today we are going to talk about my suggested 10 best ways to start your book. Now, these are just my suggestions, and keep in mind that writing is different for everybody. So, for every one of these suggestions that I offer, they may or may not work for you, or there might be a successful author out there who has broken every one of these rules in one of their books. So just keep that in mind. These are just 10 tips and tricks on ways to start your novel. But before we do that, I invite you to please like this video. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you find these tips and tricks helpful, share them with your author friends. And let's get the word out there and help as many folks as we can, since writing is such a hard industry. I think us supporting one another as much as we can is the best way to help everybody. So now, diving into my 10 best ways to start your book. Keep in mind that you won't hook a reader with the first sentence. It takes a solid, well-written first page or even first chapter. So don't beat yourself up over that very first sentence. Don't spend months and years working on that perfect first sentence. You're not going to catch anybody with that perfect first sentence. It doesn't typically happen. Yes, there are authors who do it. Yes, there are people out there who we all remember certain books that had the very first sentence that just grabbed us. And that's great. But it's just something to keep in mind, that it's more important to have a really well-written first paragraph or well-written first page or even well-written first chapter. That's what's going to hook a reader. So focus on that. Make that first chapter the strongest you can possibly make it, and you're going to be set. The other big thing, the next big tip, is start at the beginning of the story. Now, this is a challenge because for everybody, it's different, right? When is the beginning of the story? Where does this character's journey actually start? That's something you have to think about. But keep in mind, how does a story actually begin? Now, this is something that's big for a lot of authors. I know I've done this as well. But typically, don't get involved in the backstory. If you have to spend 3 chapters building the backstory, then that's not where the book starts, right? The book starts someplace else, or maybe that's a whole different book. So maybe instead of 1 book, you have 2 books, right? That does happen. So don't get involved in the backstory, but if the backstory is important to the story, then maybe that's a whole separate book that you need to think about writing. The third best way to start your book is start with your main character. Now that seems really easy and like a duh moment, but a lot of people don't start with the main character. And what I mean by the main character is, typically in books you have a main character, and then you can have multiple points of view and you can have multiple main characters. I have some books where I have 1 main character. I have some books where I have 3 main characters. I have some books that I have 2 main characters. It just depends. But you need to start with the main character. So don't start with Bob the barista, who is not at all important to the story, right? You want to start with that main character. You want to be focused on them. You want to have them start the book, so you're introducing your reader to that character so they get to know that character. I had a friend of mine, and she started her book with the character waking up and had no recollection, no memory, right? Didn't know who they were, didn't know anything. And that's a big no-no for some people, but it worked really well. So, like I said, there's exceptions to everything, but that just stuck in my mind, and I thought I would share that with you. The 4th tip I have for you is give a snapshot of the main character's life, but keep it brief, right? So Don't go into their entire backstory from their childhood trauma, if they had childhood trauma or whatever, right? Just give a snapshot of their day to day. Are they a school teacher? Did they just finish with their last class of the day and they're getting ready to go home? Are they a police officer who just finished with his shift? There are ways to do that in the very beginning of the story so the reader has an idea of who this main character is. Are they a nurse? Are they a doctor? Are they a scientist? Are they a space ranger? Are they an elfin, lord getting ready to do craft? Are they a demon? Are they an angel? Give the reader just enough information to give the reader, that's what I want to say. Boy, it's tough having a tongue today. Give the reader enough information so they know who this character is. Try not to be vague, is basically where I'm going with that. The next big thing is introduce the problem. Now, what I mean by this is, what are your characters up against? What is the motivation of the story? This can be anything, right? But think about what they're up against. Was there a disaster? Did they just wake up from a nightmare? Give us an idea of at least what one of the problems of the story is. It doesn't have to be the main problem. It doesn't have to be the main issue. It just has to be something that makes this character interesting and makes this story interesting. Think about why you want to read the story, right? Put yourself in the reader's perspective. If it's an adventure story, well, then what leads them to that adventure, right? So kind of keep that in mind. Introduce the problem. The next tip I have, and I believe that this is, if I'm counting correctly, okay, maybe I'm not counting correctly. I'm going to have to look at my script. Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, this is tip number 6. Wow. I am just having problems today, guys. Please bear with me. Introduce the world as it becomes relevant. This goes back up to the whole backstory thing, right? I did this in one of my books. I spent way too much going into all the details and the history and all this other stuff that really didn't need to be done. One of the people, Eric, who read the book, looked at me and he said, "You want me to be honest?" I said, "Yes." He said, "It reads like a textbook. It's boring." And it was like, okay, well, that was honest, and ouch, that hurt a little bit. But it was what I needed to hear, right? So I had spent so much time introducing the world that I bored him and he didn't care about getting to know the characters. So introduce the world as it becomes relevant. Explain bits and pieces as things become relevant. If you're starting with a non-human character, maybe have them eat or drink something that's not, hot coffee or a hot tea or a hot chocolate. Have it be something else, right? Have it be anything else to help set the world. The reader knows, wow, this isn't a human, this is something different. Next up is number 7. This is a big one, and I have mixed feelings about it. But it's the old adage, show, don't tell. Like I said, I have mixed feelings about this. I think there's a time and a place for both. But according to everything that I've been told, everything that I've read, everything that I've seen, one of the best ways to start a book is show, don't tell. Fine. So here we go. What that means is don't explain everything to the reader. Don't, explain the setting. Don't tell them everything. You want them to kind of explore it and give it examples and hit them with all the senses, right? Instead of saying Rahim woke up and glanced at the clock on the wall showing that it was 5 a.m. and he knew that he needed to start his day as a bouncer at a bar or whatever, right? I don't know. I'm just making it up as I go along. Give examples. So the same example, the sunlight started to peek through the curtains on warming Rahim's face, as he shifted in his bed and rolled over, blocking the light from his eyes, pulling his soft duvet cover over his head to block out the light. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of hit the textures and the senses and all that stuff, just so that you're painting a picture and you're not telling the picture. Makes it a little bit more fun for the reader, is kind of where I'm going with that. 8. This is tip number 8. Make the reader care about the story. And this is so important, guys. This tip, if you pay attention to nothing else I say today, this is the big one. Because there's nothing worse than getting halfway through the story and finding out that you don't care about any of these characters. It's happened to me. I've read books where I'm like, God, not only do I not like these characters, I could care less about any of them. Make the reader care about the characters and the story. If they don't care about the characters, then they won't be interested in the book. And how you do this is show vulnerability. Make these characters relatable. Give them a foible. Do something silly with them. Just make them approachable. If they're this beautiful Adonis and this beautiful woman or this beautiful man that, every proportion is right and they just look great in everything, have them make fun of themselves when they're looking in the mirror. Have them do something relatable for the reader so that we get to care about these people and we're interested in them. As much as we all say that we love, the beautiful people and reading about these beautiful, sexy people and all that, we also like knowing that they're a bit human and can be a bit of a mess, kind of like us. It just makes them more approachable and we care about them a little bit more. Tip number 9 is write the first chapter and then move on. So what does this mean? This means it goes back to one of the very first tips that I gave is write your chapter, but don't fixate on it. Yes, the first chapter is important and that's what editing is for. But don't spend years and months and weeks and days and hours of your life writing this perfect first chapter, because you've got a whole story to write and that first chapter may change. I think I've told this story before in one of my books. My first chapter, I think it was in Contact, is not the first chapter of the book. So what people read now, that was like chapter 8 originally. That wasn't chapter 1. So I spent all this time and effort on my original chapter 1 that ended up being like 3 or 4 chapters later. Because it just, once I finished with the story, I had to go back and make the change, and it was like all of a sudden chapter 8 was where the story started. It was where this character's journey began, and it was like, okay, well I have to that now becomes chapter 1. So there you go. There's chapter 1, one and done, and I spent all that time and energy on the original first chapter. Didn't even end up being the first chapter. So what I'm saying here is write the first chapter, move on. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it does need to be finished. So finish up that first chapter, move on. Let the chapter sit so you can move on with the story. That's really important. You don't want to get hung up on that story, that part of the first chapter, right? You want to move forward. You want to keep going. And the big thing, and I don't always do this, so I'm just being honest with you guys, I do go back and fuss with each of my chapters as I write them. That's just kind of how I get back into the groove of the story. But this is something that's important, so I'm going to tell it to you. Don't focus on editing that first chapter. Don't focus editing any of your chapters as you're writing your first draft. Write the story out, get it all done on paper or on the computer, be done with it, then go back and edit it. Like I said, I break this rule all the time. So, take this for a grain of salt. And the last and the most important tip, and again, I cannot emphasize this enough, when you are writing your book and you're starting out, the best way to start your book is to relax and have fun. It is hard to write. It is hard to put yourself out there. It is hard to take everything that's in here and put it down into here. It's not easy. but you wouldn't be doing it unless you absolutely loved it. So, try and relax and try and have fun. Chapter 1 is the hardest chapter to write. So keep that in mind. And you're going to have plenty of time to fix it and make it the best possible chapter you can. So, when you're working on your novels and you're starting with chapter 1, page 1, paragraph 1, sentence 1, take a deep breath, put on some good music, have your glass of your favorite beverage with you, have fun and start writing, because that is what it's all about. Well, guys, I hope this information was helpful. I hope my 10 tips and tricks for how to start your book at least gave you something to think about. And again, if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please don't forget to share it with other authors. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. That does mean the world for me. If you have questions, please leave them in the comments below. Yeah, so that's it for today, everybody. Have a great day. This has been Author MD New with my writing tips and tricks for authors, and we'll see you again real soon. Bye.